To introduce you to your guest speaker for the Masterclass today, it's award-winning marketer Jenna Tiffany. Jenna has been recognized in 2020 as one of the top 50 marketers to follow in the world and is the founder and strategy director at Let's Talk Strategy, providing strategic consultancy services across the digital marketing mix. She is also a chartered marketer and awarded fellow of the IDM with over 10 years marketing experience. Jenna has consulted with brands such as Shell, Hilton, and World Duty Free, just to name a few, on email marketing strategy. She regularly gets interviewed for her thoughts on the latest trends and is soon to be a published author. Over to you, Jenna.
Hi, thanks so much for the introduction. Brilliant to be here. And let me share my screen. Let's get started. Got a lot to go through, so I'm very excited to be here today. So, hopefully you can all see that. Yeah, is that a definite? Can you, someone verbalize a yes so I can hear? Okay, brilliant. I think you can all see my screen. So I'll get started. So yes, I'm Jenna Tiffany. I'm going to be going through how to create a successful customer-centric marketing strategy today. This would normally be a 1-day, 2-day workshop. So I am going to be running through some things quite quickly, but what I've done is I've created like an information pack that you'll get given following the event today. So it contains all the slides that are in here, all the examples, and all the models and templates that are included in here as well. So let's get started. So today's plan is to go through strategy and what that actually means, because there's quite a big misconception of that in the industry. Look at situation analysis and why that's important, and particularly now as well, during the COVID situation that we all find ourselves in, why it's important to understand the marketing environment in which you're operating in. Defining objectives, understanding who your customer is, and using segmentation, targeting, and positioning effectively. I'm going to go through examples, methods, and templates that how you can do that. Tactics, defining those tactics, those channels that you're going to use and why you're going to use them. And then looking at action and control to make sure you have a successful marketing strategy at the end of it and are able to measure those successes as well. Okay, what is marketing? I think it's always really important for us to take a step back, because we're so involved in the day-to-day that sometimes you can just get so overwhelmed, so bogged down in the day-to-day BAU, business as usual operation, that we sometimes forget that actually what the core essential need is of marketing. And that is to identify and anticipate and satisfy customer requirements, and to do so profitably. You'll see here, this is the official CIM definition from 1976, and this still stands today. This is exactly what marketing should be focused on. It should all be focusing on identifying, predicting and anticipating, and also satisfying those customer requirements, but to do so in a profitable way. So the customer should be at the center of everything that we do in marketing, and it's really important that it's at the center of your marketing strategy. So let's get started with, there's a huge misunderstanding in the industry. So let's start by clearing that up to begin with. And I face this every single day as a strategist. Bad marketing strategy is choosing the channel, the ads copy. If you're looking at creating some Facebook ads, you're building and spending a lot of time on your email marketing campaigns before actually defining your strategy. So what do I mean by that? So strategy isn't something that should be seen to be something that happens in the corner and you create this really big manual and no one ever looks at it again. It should all be about a plan to achieving your goals and objectives. And that could be something that's identified on a couple of pages of A4. It doesn't have to be a lengthy document, but it should be researched and it should be focused on your customer. The important part here is defining the why, so why you're doing what you're doing, before the how, before thinking about what your email campaign is going to look like, before you determine which Facebook ad you're about to put live or which social media channel you're about to use. It should all be about defining the why before the how. And that's the really, really important distinction between strategy and tactics. Strategy is the why. The tactics is how you then implement that strategy. And very often I see a lot of focus on the how and not enough focus at the very beginning of why you're doing what you're doing in the first place. And that's the strategic part. So where do we start? There's a really, really useful model that you may have seen called the SOS stack. It was created by P.R. Smith, and it breaks down each stage that should be included in a strategy. So it starts with the situation analysis, moves on into the objectives that are then informed by the marketing environment around the business, both internally and externally. And I'm going to go through that in detail. Then those objectives determine what needs to happen in the strategy to fulfill those objectives. The tactics then are how you implement that strategy, so the channels and tools and techniques you're going to use to do that. Then it's the action, so who's going to be doing which part of the plan, what needs to happen to implement those tactics. And then the control element. How do you measure success? How do you make sure that you mitigate risks of the strategy failing? Or what do you do if you see that it's underperforming or overperforming? How do you then control that situation? So this can be broken down into key questions. So starting with answering, where are you now? Then moving on into where do you want to be by defining your objectives. Then looking at what is the best route to take by determining your strategy and then those tactics to take you on that route. And then are we on course, which is your actions. You have your action plan to determine whether or not you're actually on course in terms of budget, resourcing, planning. And then have we successfully arrived within the control section, which is the measurement of checking in that you've actually achieved those objectives that you set right at the very beginning. So this is what we're going to be going through today in our hour together. And I'm going to keep checking on the time. I'm conscious there's a lot to go through. If you have any questions, do add them in to the question section that you have there in the chat box, and we'll come to those at the end. Okay, so why is monitoring the marketing environment important? And this is your situation analysis. So this is really important, and even more so now, but it's important anyway as an absolute fundamental basic for a marketing strategy. It's for you to be able to understand the environment in which the business is operating in. So what's changing, what's staying the same, how are your customers' needs and wants maybe moving and adapting, and maybe there's something new that's coming into play. What's happening with the competition, how are they adapting and changing? Organizations that regularly conduct situation analysis are ones that spot trends early. They therefore then have a competitive advantage. So a really good example of this is Uber. They predicted and saw that consumers' expectations were changing. Customers wanted to be able to pay by cash when they went into their taxis. By cards. They didn't want to use cash because they didn't have as much cash on them anymore. They also wanted to be able to track their route to check that actually they weren't getting taken the long way around when they couldn't see that previously. And they also, if they're traveling on their own, wanted to make sure that they could let someone else know where they were, just in case they needed to from a safety perspective. Uber took all those three different changes in customer expectations of a taxi service and created a business from that. And those taxi companies that then felt surprised by this whole change in expectation from a customer were those that did not spot those trends and changes in customer expectation. If they'd been conducting a situation analysis, they would have spotted that that's what was happening with their customers. This is what the customers were asking for. This is what they wanted. So there are two models to do this with, and we're looking at here the micro factors, which is inside the organization. They are direct influence on the firm's marketing operations. They also mean that they can be controllable in some shape or form. And then there's the macro factors, which are outside of the organization. So a good example of this would be COVID. This is outside the organization's control. It's external, but it still has an impact on the organization. So it's important to have awareness of those areas. So the first model that you can use to look at the micro environment, which is the internal environment, is a SWOT analysis. Now, you may have come across this before and think, okay, this is just a lot of theory, but actually this is a really, really useful exercise, particularly now when your organization has probably changed quite a lot, or it you think it needs to change, or maybe you have resources that are changing because of the current climate. It's really important to identify what your strengths are as an organization, what those weaknesses are, where there might be opportunities and where there are threats, and seeing if there are areas there that you could actually combat a threat with a strength, or maybe an opportunity with a strength, and actually you're really particularly strong in that area that's proposed as an opportunity. You can also conduct a SWOT as a team, as a marketing department, to see where your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats lie as well. So let's have a look as an example. This is just an example of a SWOT conducted with a client that I worked with, where they were looking at their marketing in terms of what were their strengths. So their current product is unique in its design, the audience already exists, but their weaknesses were that actually they had no YouTube presence, and that was a heavily focused competitive area for their product that they were selling. And they had no unique and original content ideas. They were really struggling in that area as a marketing team. When looking at their opportunities, they could look at ambassadors, advertising testimonials, educational posts to try and inform their customer base and grow a following that way. And looking at their threats, is a very competitive landscape, and there are also cheaper, lower quality products available online, which meant they were very well established competitors as well. So it was a very, very competitive, price-driven market that they were operating in. And so they needed to really be able to convey that quality piece. So you can see then how you start to pick out what those key areas are that you could be focusing on or improving upon, or actually growing further in your strength. This is really important to be doing right now during the current climate. See how you are different to your competition. And we'll look at competitors shortly. The next one, when we're looking at external environment, is called the pestle model. And that covers the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors that could affect an organization who doesn't really have control on what happens in those areas, but could still have a direct impact on their operation. So in terms of political, there's a lot of changes going on politically at the moment. Take UK for an example. Brexit is looming. That happens on the 1st of January. There will be different changes in tax tariffs. There's going to be changes to VAT. All of that has an impact on an organisation, and it's not within their control. So it's really important to have that awareness, a holistic awareness of what's happening outside of your company. The other really important part here is the social element, where this is all about your customer. What's changing in their attitudes? What's changing in their shopping habits? Demographic changes could be happening here. And this is something that is changing very quickly at the moment. And there's been lots of studies and reports looking at the change in loyalty of consumers, where it's actually dropping, because a lot of customers who were loyal at the very beginning of lockdown found that their favorite brand or product went out of stock very quickly. They then chose an alternative, another competitor, and now they are more open to exploring other options. It's a really important area to keep an eye on and be aware of. Here's an example of what that might look like. This is based on a UK, looking at UK market trends. And this is just an example. So for political, it might be the changes in the pound exchange rate in comparison to the euro, for example, and you can see the fluctuation over the last 2 years. Could be that if you're a beauty and personal care, you're in the beauty sector, the economic changes, and here is a research monitor. They do some really, really great research into consumer behavior. They do a lot of predictive areas in terms of market sizes, and this is what they're predicting here in terms of the forecast of the market size. Also looking at what people are spending on, so economic example here, so looking at how many Brits spend on beauty and grooming, and what they are actually spending, who spent the most out of male and females, and how much was that. So you can start to then see what that market size looks like. You can also see that it goes into a little bit more detail here, and this these types of reports are really important to digest, to read. I read lots of research reports, so you get a feel for what's changing, because we're not our typical consumer. So it's really important that we understand our customers and where they're spending, what they're doing, what their expectations are to satisfy those needs and wants in marketing. So you see how this is all broken down. These will be shared with you after, including the links as well, to give you some examples of the different types of reports available. If you haven't already checked out wearesocial.com, they do an absolutely brilliant annual internet trends report. It doesn't just cover social media, it actually covers the internet and how it's used globally. A really detailed report. This is an example of looking at Facebook advertising audience. This is actually global, it's not UK. And you can see the different changes in gender and age. And this is important when you identify who your customer is in terms of which channels they're on, which channels are going to be most relevant to you and your strategy and your tactics. So I've included the link to the report there. They do that every year. It really is worth checking out. And then looking at technological, there's lots of changes going on in terms of smart speakers and how that's being used by consumers. It's a new piece of technology, and this is growing. So I looked at this 2 years ago and in 2019, and this is growing massively in terms of its uptick in usage, but also how it's being used as well. It's only going to be a matter of time before purchases are going to be made through a smart speaker. So it really is important to try and keep that in the back of your mind of how you might need to adopt your potential e-commerce experience through a smart speaker, and what maybe your email marketing sounds like if it was read out on a smart speaker is something to be at the forefront of, so that you're prepared before your customers get there. And legal changes, this is something that happened at the very end of last year that a lot of organisations weren't aware of in the UK, that there needed to be an extra layer of authentication for online payments. Really important to keep an eye on the changes in legal requirements, because they are changing quite a lot in the last couple of years. We had GDPR in Europe was a big change. There's been lots of changes in the US as well in terms of changes of data protection. So do make sure that you keep your finger on the pulse in terms of legal changes. So it really is important. Sometimes there's only 3 or 6 months to be prepared, and that can take a lot of time for an organisation to be ready for those types of changes. And then environmental could be the change in recycling, water pollution, production standards. They could all have an impact on your organisation, your suppliers, without you having much control over, but could ultimately reduce your profit margin. So it really is important to keep awareness of these changes that are happening outside of your organization. And it's really important because you need to be able to read the room. Now, I'm not sure how many of you might have seen this from Kim Kardashian. Actually, yesterday, I believe I saw this, happened the day before, and now it's become a meme all over social media or on Twitter, where Kim Kardashian has not read the room. She has not looked at the context of what's happening in the world, and her bragging about taking her whole family to a private island so that she could celebrate her birthday in a really lavish way is really not a great time to start promoting, your wealth and really starting to, as what it looks like, bragging about that experience, and has had a lot of backlash on social media. So it's really important that we as marketers can read the room, that we can understand what our customers are going through, so that we appear in context. And I've got some marketing examples of those as well shortly. Analysing the competition. There's Porter's 5 Forces, which you may have heard of. If you haven't, do check that out. This is an example on the screen. Apologies, it's a little bit blurry on the screen there. But basically, this is looking at how easy is it to enter your market. So how high is the threat of new entrants, or is there a high cost to join your industry? What's the bargaining power of buyers? If you changed your price, would there be a lot of competition and alternatives? What's the threat of substitutes of products or services? How many alternatives are there in the industry, or do you have quite a niche? And what's the bargaining power of suppliers? So are you heavily reliant on one supplier, or actually do you have a lot of alternatives to go through and go to and maybe adapt and change? This is really important also to have a good awareness of in case you needed to, in case you're looking to create a new product, or you want to increase your stock levels, or you might want to look at changing your pricing. All of these factors here have an important part to play. So what does your business want to achieve? So that was your situation analysis. You see, we've whistled through that. So that would be something that could take a couple of hours, it could take a half a day, a couple of days, depending on the number of people that you wanted to get involved in that process. It is generally useful to have a lot of stakeholders involved in your situation analysis, but if that's not possible, having the marketing team involved and then maybe having that sense checked by other departments if you're a big organization, like your customer service team, for example, is also useful to get their perspective as well. So now we're looking at objectives. So what does your business want to achieve? So objectives is something that I typically don't see being conducted very often. And if they are conducted, they tend to be quite top level of, we want to increase sales. And I appreciate everybody wants to increase sales, but there needs to be some more granularity to that objective to give the motivation to the staff, to make sure you're all going in the right direction, and also to provide a benchmark so you have a way of measuring whether or not it's been successful or not. If you want to increase your sales, by how much? With which market? Which type of customer? Which product? Is there a particular location in the world that you want to do that in? There are different influences on objectives. So external influences can have a pressure on objectives. The business itself can naturally have an influence on objectives. You've got individuals and groups and organizational culture as well that can have an impact on those objectives. So these, it could include, and this is what I typically see, is where it's very top level, launch new products or services. And what we're really looking for here is that they are SMART objectives. This is created by Dave Chaffee, Smart Insights, so that they are specific. What exactly is it that you want to achieve? How are you going to measure it? So what is the target? So if it's to increase your sales, of how much? What percentage is that as a particular revenue number that you're looking for? How detailed, you really need to go into the detail here so you can then go back to check that you have achieved that and that you have a clear direction for your strategy. Is it achievable for the organization to actually meet that target and objective? And you could base that on last year's performance. You could base that on your insights from your situation analysis as well. Is it realistic? Is it realistic in the current climate that that can be achieved? Is it realistic that actually there's that much increase available in the marketplace? And timely, when do you want to achieve that objective by? Is it in 6 months? Is it in a year? Be as specific and detailed as possible so that you can have then regular milestones and check-in points to see that you're on the right track to achieve that objective. Your objective as well doesn't have to be for a year, 2 years, 3 years. It could be for the next 3 months. It could be actually that you need to just have this objective for the next month. So you've got a real focus and a real goal to go after. And that's absolutely fine. It's so that you have a real focus and that you are making sure that you're not deviating or going away from what the business is trying to achieve as well. This is an example here. From a client that I worked with. So they had their business objective on the left-hand side. They then turned that into a social media goal because that was a core channel for them. And then they looked at those different metrics that they were going to use to measure whether or not they'd met that social media goal. But the important point here is that that social media goal is linked to the business objective. So then they can actually demonstrate the value of marketing, of how it's actually helped the business achieve its overall objectives as well. So the marketing mix, I'm sure the majority of you have heard of this before. Hopefully you do regularly use it. There's a lot of discussion in the marketing industry as to whether or not this is still has its time and place now today. And it does. It's a really core fundamental of marketing. And the reason why it's so important is so that we don't spend all our time just on focusing on getting the right price, or that we don't focus all our time on creating a brilliant product and then don't think about where it's going to be sold or how we're going to promote it or the people involved in that or the processes to help with delivery or the physical evidence of how we can reinforce the quality of a product. It's really important that we have all of those 7 areas are covered in our marketing strategy and our marketing campaigns. But the core important point of this, as you'll see in the middle, is that it's all geared and focused towards your target market. So where is your customer? Where's going to be the right place to attract your customer? What's your customer looking for in a product? How's that going to benefit what they're seeking, their needs and wants? How's it going to fulfill? Maybe there's a particular problem that they have that they're going to use your product to solve. How's it going to do that? What would be their expected price? And these are all the areas we should be thinking about in terms of our customer. So there's a really, really useful tool if you are a product organization to help bring out more about what your product is, rather than just thinking about single product of, say, for example, it's a cup, but actually, what is the actual product? What's its features? What's its design? What's its packaging? What's the quality level? What's the brand name? You know, what makes it the actual product itself? You know, there's another layer to it just being a cup to hold a drink. And then what is the augmented product? So what happens once a customer's purchased with you? What's the after sales service? What's the warranty? What's the delivery and credit that's available? Is there anything at all? Maybe there isn't. So think about what is the augmented product at each level for your own item that you're selling, for your own offering. There's more than just the core benefit in the center. There's all of these other layers, 3 layers on top of that you can then hone in on your marketing messaging, and really thinking about what your customers wanting to see. What are they wanting to see as features? What are they wanting to see as a warranty? You know, what's their expectation when they purchase from you? Do you have that within your product? This was a model created by Kotler. There's lots of resources online for this. It really is a very useful exercise, particularly if you have a new product, even for an existing one, where you start to actually get into real detail of what your product is in terms of its features and its benefits, not just a surface level. It really digs deep into that. It's a really great exercise to do with the rest of the team, marketing team, and the product team if you have a separate product team. So overview of STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And if there's lots of questions coming in, because I'm unable to see that right now, we can go to those at the end, but do keep them coming if you have got any questions. Okay, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. The core focus here is creating value for your customer. So segmentation, dividing the total of your customers into smaller segments, and that could be based on their characteristics, but they should be different from each segment to make a valuable proportion of your customer base. You then have targeting, so you select that segment to target. And then deciding on your value proposition is how you differentiate the market offering to create superior customer value. So what makes you different from your competitors? And how does that satisfy your customers? And that's the bit we need to be looking at there when we're thinking about differentiation. And then positioning, position the market offering in the minds of the target consumer. A very difficult area to get right. And is definitely an area that should be a really big focus, your positioning. How would your customers place you in the marketplace? There's a brilliant book by April Dunford, I want to say, but I will check that out. And it's called Obviously Awesome. It's available on Amazon. It focuses all on positioning, and it's got some really, really great techniques and tips in there on how to position your product in the marketplace to your target customer. So segmentation. So there's several different ways of segmenting your customer. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of these areas, but definitely always something to go back and revisit. If you've inherited segmentation that's been done several years ago, your customers might have changed in terms of how you group them, what they look like, in terms of their characteristics. So do revisit this. An effective checklist for segmentation is to make sure that you have a measurable amount of people in your segment. If it's 1 or 2 people, that really is very, very much micro marketing, where you're doing that on a one-to-one basis. And that person needs to be really distinctly different from the rest of the people that you're targeting. They need to be able to be accessible, that you can reach them, that you have consent to market to them. It needs to be a substantial number. And they need to be different from the other segments that you have, and naturally be able to action based on those characteristics, a distinctive way of approaching those particular customers. So building a competitive advantage is really, really important to distinguish yourselves in a marketplace, particularly if it's a very, very competitive marketplace. What makes you different? What's your unique selling point to the rest of your competitors? So there's several ways that you could differentiate yourself, and this could be through your product. Maybe you have superior quality in your product. Could be your service, that you're really responsive, that you're friendly, that you get really good feedback from your customer service department. Could be the channels that you use is different from your competitors. You might actually use a completely different promotional mix to your competitors. The people could be a really strong differentiator from your competitors in terms of their skill, their approach, their personalities, and your image could be completely different from your competitors, and that's what makes you stand out. But it needs to be something that provides superior value to your customers. So once you understand more about what your customers are expecting from you, you're able then to see where you can start to make yourself different from your competitors. So who is your customer? A lot of brands really struggle to understand who their customer really is, or sometimes it can be, it's very easy to think about what you would do as a person, and as if you're in your customer situation, but you're not your customer. So we really need to make sure that on a regular basis, we're checking in with our customers. And there's a variety of different ways of doing that. So a buyer persona, or a customer persona as also called, is where you start to think more about the personality of your customer. I've worked with organizations that have actually created cardboard cutouts of their customers, how they see them as a persona, and put them into their meeting rooms, so that the rest of the company, when they're making decisions, always then think about their customer. It's almost like a visual representation of their customer, make sure that they think about what their interests are going to be, what they would think about what they've just decided. It gives them that regular check-in point. And sometimes we do forget, we can get very internally focused on our own business and forget about our customer that we're trying to service. So there's several factors to play here. There's demographic, psychographic, behavioral, and environmental that can all play a factor in defining your customer and buyer persona. It could be for a B2B organization that you're looking at different job roles. So you have the CEO, you have the VP of marketing, you've got the business development manager, and each one is going to have a different need and want from your organization. They're going to have different objectives personally. They're also going to have different responsibilities, and they're going to be expected to be spoken to in different ways. So it might be that actually the CEO has a personal assistant who's actually vetting their calls. So you have a gatekeeper to get through first before you can even get to the CEO. It might be that actually you have discussions with the business development manager first, who then speaks to the VP of marketing, and then you have your meetings and conversations with those two personas together, and then the CEO gets brought into that. And by then, the information that the CEO is going to want is going to be very different to the VP of marketing and the business development manager. The downfall that a lot of organizations fall into is that they give out too much information to start with, and it bombards your target customer. So do try and think about that customer journey, what their expectations are going to be at each stage if they're just information searching. Not going to want to know the really technical information in and out of the piece of technology if they're looking to purchase that at the very beginning, because that will scare them off. It look too complicated. They just want to know how it's going to help them achieve their goals and objectives, how it's going to make their life easier would be their initial question point there. So really thinking about that, the different stages in that customer journey. Here's an example. We have Sally here. It's a B2B example. We've got the background, we've got the demographics, and we've got the different identifiers here as well. And this is what customer persona can look like. It can also be a lot more detailed. It can also be, bringing into more of a personality, like actually making it out, almost become its own person. Really useful and a really good check-in point to make sure you are focusing on your customer at all times. Positioning maps. So I talked about positioning a couple of minutes ago. You can use a positioning map where you look at high quality, low price, high price, and you position where you think your organization fits along with your competitors. And then you need to think about where your customers might position you. You might have a visual representation of where you would put your own product or service, but your customers might have a very different one. So it's important to keep that in mind and think about where you would position yourselves in amongst your competitors. And maybe that you'd identify a gap. Maybe you find that actually there isn't any high quality, high price, or maybe you find that there isn't any high quality or medium quality and medium price, and there's a gap in the marketplace. So the online value proposition, how do you explain what your benefit is to your target customer? And as I mentioned, that book, April Dunford, obviously awesome. She talks a lot about positioning, your statement. You need to make sure that it has differentiation. It doesn't sound like everybody else, because otherwise, why wouldn't they just go to your competitors? And how clear are you making that? Is it really clear and obvious what you do as an organization? Okay, so moving on into tactics. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, tactics are the detail of the strategy. So they are how you implement that strategy. So you've identified the situation that's taking place. You have your objectives that you're looking to achieve aligned with the business objectives. And then you also now know a lot more about your customer and what their needs and wants are. So now it's looking at how you're going to implement that strategy to achieve those objectives and suit those needs and wants of your customer. So this can be a list of all the digital media tools, a marketing plan, and when they're going to be used and when. Tactics do not drive the strategy. Really important, they implement the strategy. So we've gone through where are you now? Where do you want to go? Who is your customer? How you are going to get there is the tactical part that we're going to look at now. And was the strategy a success is what we're going to look at in terms of measurement. So the RACI model by Smart Insights is a really useful model for identifying the different tactics, the different messaging, and the different approaches that you're going to use at each stage of the RACI model, which is the customer journey effectively of driving a conversion from your customer. So if we think about the reach element, this is all about driving awareness. How are you going to reach your target customer? Where are they? Where do they spend their time? What are they typically doing? How can you raise your awareness within those areas and reach your target customer? How can you engage the audience to act, to get them onto your website, to get them to read that blog post, to download that white paper, to join your online event, to contact you potentially, maybe by email or telephone, depending on how you operate as a business? How do you drive that action? How do you drive them to click the CTA in your email marketing? What's going to interest them and engage them enough to do that? And that's what you're focusing on there in terms of channels and messaging. And that is what you're trying to achieve in that particular stage. The convert element is all about achieving that conversion. So at the point of just about hitting checkout, they're entering their card details, they're just about to check out online on your website. Do you then display reviews, testimonials, easy returns to achieve that conversion? How are you going to reassure your customer that purchasing with you is the right thing to do ahead of the competition? And that's what you're thinking about there. That's what your optimization points are. And then finally, how do you engage your customers enough to come back to you again? How do you get them to become advocates? How do you get them to go and talk to their friends and family? How do you build those relationships? There's a lot of discussions at the moment about the importance of loyalty schemes. They work with for some organizations, they don't work for others. But how do you think about building enough of an engagement with your customers that they will want to come back with you? An example here of ASOS, a clothing retailer, at the point of just about checking out, they talk about the delivery, that it's free, there's free and easy returns, and how it works. So that you feel then, okay, if maybe these items don't fit me, I can return it back for free. There's very little risk for me if this doesn't work out and then it's not as I expected online, to reassure them and to drive that conversion. The ultimate question to answer at this stage is, what is the value? What's the value to your customer in making a purchase? What's the value in your customer for opening your email campaigns? What's the value to your customer of engaging with you on social media or visiting your website? What's the value to them? What do they get? What's the benefit? And it might be that actually they get a lot of information. They get a lot of answers to the questions that they have when they visit your website. And that's brilliant. It doesn't have to be about displaying coupons or discounts. And they have a place, but also think about what you could do with your content, how you can engage your audience and drive value that way as well. How can you help them on their journey to make the decision and answer those questions that they have at those different stages? And when we think about what we're sending to our customers in terms of the tactics, do always think about, if you're trying to build those relationships, and yes, of course, personalization has a place to play in that, but also think about testing that and making sure that actually, if you are using first names or you're using any form of personalization, that there's a fallback, that if the name isn't displayed or you have a gap in your database, that you have a default option that appears as well. You can see here, this is actually a very, very good campaign. I wanted to thank its customers, to say happy birthday, gave them free birthday tacos to get them back into their restaurant, but it fell over because it had the F name. It didn't have their first name on there, just because of a database error that wasn't thought through. So do test these campaigns for the scenarios of, what if we don't have that piece of data? And also think about, when you are targeting your customers, what that experience looks like for them as the customer, not just from a marketing perspective, but also go through the process of purchasing a product on your website and receiving the follow-up communications from various channels. What does that experience feel like? Does it feel quite disjointed? Is it all very well connected? Does it look like it comes from your brand? Do you think about all these things, because they all have an impact on whether you retain that customer, convert the customer, or get them to come back to you and make that purchase or come and visit you again. So this is an example of something that happens in my inbox on a regular basis. And this was a real example where you can see my name is used in the subject line. There's 7 emails in total that are sent in my inbox. I didn't open any of these emails and they just kept coming every couple of days from a brand I hadn't engaged with before. I'm not quite sure where they got my email address from. And if this was in a real life scenario, this would be considered stalking, yet this is something that's happening very often in our customers' inboxes. Now, yes, there is a tick there that there's personalization included. There's an attempt to tailor the experience, but do look at what you're sending across all the different channels that you might be sending from, and what that overall customer journey looks like for a typical customer, and see if there's areas that actually could be optimized further, Or maybe you find that actually you're not sending very much at all. And actually your customers don't hear from you for months on end. So do make sure that you are looking at that entire experience from start to finish. So there is a risk as marketers that as we collaborate more with machines, which we are doing, automation has a brilliant place to play in helping us implement those tactics. Going through that racing model, a lot of automation would be at play in there, but we need to make sure that we don't lose empathy and that we do think about the human element as well and what that would feel like in a real life scenario. So this was a campaign that was sent at the very, very start of COVID. This was sent in April. And the subject line said, "Happy birthday to us." You can see the copy says, "A lot has changed in 9 years." At the time, a lot had changed in 9 minutes, let alone 9 years. And it's felt very tone deaf. It was an automated campaign that was sent. It clearly been set up pre-COVID. And pre-COVID, yes, okay, it might have been a little bit more well received. But during COVID, when everybody's going into lockdown, no one really cares if it's your organization's birthday or not. It's very congratulations to yourself. You know, it's really thinking about what benefit is this to your customers. So review and adjust any automated campaigns that you have that were created pre-COVID. So think about, you might have some campaigns that are still going out automated. Think about reviewing those. And whether or not they fit the context of today, because a lot has changed during that time. There's a lot of automated campaigns that get sent and set up for years on end and they don't get reviewed. And it might be now that actually they don't fit the current situation, the current context. They seem very much out of date, robotic, inhumane, lacking empathy. So do take the time to review and adjust those, because these are all important in helping your customers along their journey and experience with you. These all have a part to play. So that this type of campaign that was sent was out of context. It looked completely tone deaf, and that's not how you want to come across to your customers, particularly now when they're incredibly sensitive. We all have a lot going on as well, so it's really important to really think about your customers and how you can help them on their journey, and how you can make their lives a little bit easier. Just think about that copy that's in any campaigns that have already been pre-automated or pre-set up. And context is absolutely key. So this was an advertising campaign that I saw on social media a couple of days ago. And I'll be honest, I was very, very surprised to see this campaign from such a very well-known brand. It was a sponsored advertising campaign. It says about experiencing pure luxury from lounge to lobby with Dubai business class flights. Book by the 3rd of November, £1,325 per person for 3-night hotel stay. And you might think, okay, you know, we all still got to promote things, still got to sell, completely appreciate that. But then when you look underneath at all of the comments, it's asking about where's my refund from a flight that I was supposed to take in March. I still don't have the refund from that flight. How do, you know, what happens with the COVID test? What happens when I'm on board? Do I have to wear a mask? You know, there was lots of information underneath, and context is absolutely key. So this type of campaign would probably have performed fairly well a year ago. But now there's so many questions that actually thinking about how you position your message is really important, because the response to this, and if the flight even got cancelled, if the person was unable to go because they got a test or they had to go into quarantine, or the Dubai decided to put a lockdown on, the customer wouldn't get a refund. And so you see there that it says T's and C's apply. It's really important to think about that context of today, because there is a lot of changing situations going on, and really thinking about how you put that into your messaging so that it doesn't come across as a negative marketing campaign. And the response to this was, you know, you can see there's 34 retweets at the time. I took the screenshot, 32 quoted tweets, or it really was doing some damage to the brand itself. So really think about that context. It's absolutely key in all times, but particularly now. So control and evaluation. What we're looking at here, so you've decided your tactics based on your customer. The evaluation and control is thinking about, are those goals being achieved, those objectives that you set at the very beginning? How far away are you from achieving those? Are the marketing activities working as you intended, as you planned? You might have different KPIs for each of those channels and tactics that you're using. Where was performance and where is it now? So what was it what was it during the campaign? What's at the end of the campaign? And how can the marketing performance be improved if it needs to? Did it underperform? What did you learn? What worked really well? What didn't work very well? So this can help inform future activity as well. So if we go back to the RACI, there's different KPIs that you would set at each stage of the RACI model. So at reach, you've got unique visitors and audience share would be some important KPIs to measure whether or not you've reached your target customer. Act, what's the bounce rate on your website? Is it really high? Is it actually really low? Have you got a high number of pages per visit? So you've got your customers engaging with more and more of your content. So they're really interested in what you have there. They have value from reading from that. Then you have convert. So what's your conversion rate? And this would be something important to measure. And looking at it in terms of your checkout as well, throughout each stage of your checkout process, if you're an e-commerce website, it's really important because you might find that you have a lot of people going on to the first page. They then see a delivery charge and then they leave. They abandon their basket, they abandon their cart, and then they don't convert. So it's really important to keep an eye all the way through, to keep optimizing that and making that experience as seamless as possible. For engage, maybe you have an increase in followers, maybe you have lots of customers coming back and buying again from you as repeat purchasers. You can see that your customers are coming back to you. If we think about how we're going to measure success, customer lifetime value is a really great metric and KPI to have, and really important to really understand what your customer lifetime value is. This can help determine whether or not you should be spending more of your marketing budget on certain channels than others, because maybe the customer lifetime value is higher. And the calculation here is on the screen. I've also put the link to the HubSpot website as well, where they go through this as an example. Really, really useful metric to keep an eye on, that customer lifetime value. Your ROI as well can be something that's very difficult to calculate, but really important to make sure you keep an eye on this. I have a calculation on here, and you can do this per marketing channel as well. It doesn't have to be just for the overall marketing cost. When we're thinking about the different tactics that we're using, there's different KPIs and metrics you can use for each of those, which I've included all the way through this to give you some ideas, or maybe some areas that you're not currently measuring in your performance. This is a really useful social media measurement framework from AMEC. I've got the link there at the very bottom of the slide, and here you can see where it's looking at exposure, engagement, preference, impact, and advocacy, and all of this should be aligned to your objectives that you set as well. So implementation plan, thinking about what are those key tasks that need to happen, how will you allocate the resources, who's going to be responsible, really important, so that everybody has ownership. If you are a big team, if you're a smaller team, how are you going to make sure you get everything done? Do you maybe need some external support? Or actually, do you maybe need to make sure the expectations that you set actually fulfill the resources that you have as well? So thinking about that. So we have gone through how what we want to achieve by defining the objective and looking at the situation as well in terms of internally and externally, so knowing what's facing the organization. We've looked at your customer and targeting them and looking at your competition, how you're going to position yourself. So thinking about where you're going to position yourself in comparison to your competition is really important. And knowing what channels are going to be used and why by the 7 Ps and the 4 Cs, and thinking about the importance of those 7 Ps and not just focusing all of our effort just on one of those. There are 7 to really be thinking about in our marketing strategy, and know how we're going to go into action control and measure the plan as well is really important. There's lots of different KPI examples and metrics in this slide deck that you'll get given at the end of today. And effectively, that's how you create a marketing strategy. Those are all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that you need to be able to have in place, or go in and review if you already have an existing strategy, and make sure that you have the answers to all of those questions that you've been thinking about in terms of who your customer is, where they are, what they're doing, how they're behaving, and how you can engage with them along their own experiences that they're having as well and be relevant to them. That's it from me. I was just about to say that I have actually just finished the final manuscript of my book in the last couple of days, and it is available to pre-order. I have lots of new templates and tools and techniques and case studies and interviews and examples, all about marketing strategy, and it takes you all the way from the start of creating one all the way through to the end. So by the end of the book, it actually has its own templates and tasks inside that you can complete as well. That's available to pre-order on Amazon, and it will be released on the 25th of May 2021. If you have any queries as well, I'm happy to take any questions, and you'll see my email address is also on the screen. So thank you all so much for your time.